The question is no longer whether polarization is a good thing or not. The question is whether you want to win or you're fine with being stamped out entirely and for good. Now, while I'm sorry to put it this way, the fact of the matter is that you cannot be moderate about these things. Some things in life really are inherently extremist, especially when you're under attack. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so this is an expansion of the thoughts outlined almost 2 years ago in the video Feel Good Mythology, Moderation is Fundamentally Good, in which I insisted that there are things in life for which such thing as moderation simply cannot exist, let alone be debated. This needs to be reaffirmed once in a while, especially after the barrage of admittedly expected petty whining that I got following my somewhat viral-ish video about the coming backlash against Me Too, in which various seemingly well-intentioned individuals engaged in what ultimately amounts to consent trolling. Now, I won't bother you with examples, the comment section is open and public, so you can look it up yourselves. The common thread, not just in the reactions to that video, but in reactions to many things said about this war, is the fundamentally wrong belief that those of us who believe in liberty should just bend over and take it, lest we disturb the increasingly illusory common good, or some similar nonsense and trash like that. And that is something that I reject, and I recommend to everyone pursuing practical politics actions to also reject it at a fundamental level. Why? Because that ship sailed a long time ago, that's why. Look, if we were to have this conversation, let's say 25 years ago, I might have agreed a bit more with that kind of a sentiment. But we're not 25 years ago. We're in the current year, and in the current year, the polarization is a done deal. And it hasn't been done by us. It is pretty absurd to have people come and tell me that it is somehow wrong for me to suggest to young white men, the only group perfectly legal and even encouraged to hate in the current year, to avoid progressives, especially progressive women, like plague. All while, at the same time, The Guardian, one of the most influential publications in the world, openly comes out and says that it is okay to discriminate against anyone who doesn't toe the line of the progressive orthodoxy. Now, I'm sorry, but I didn't start this war. Neither did anyone following any of my advice. This war was started a long time ago, before most of the people watching this were even born. All I'm saying is that fighting fire with fire can end it. Believe it or not, my methods lead to a far more moderate outcome than the methods proposed to us by the people who preach moderation as a principle. Those of us who actually care about tolerance tend to get thrown off course when someone tells us we're not living up to our ideals. Let me explain then why it's alright to discriminate against conservatives. This is in The Guardian. Here's what else is in The Guardian. Quote, "A threatened species? No, but it's true that men will lose out. It's simply not possible to ditch a system that rewarded men unfairly at women's expense without there being disagreeable consequences for at least some men, the mediocre ones especially, the ones who would have thrived a generation ago when there was no real competition but are rightly worried now. There will be losers. How could there not be? But just as advocates of social mobility shy away from explaining that it may not work out that happily for the dim but rich, women often don't like to think that there will be casualties from equality. We don't want that to be the case, partly out of guilt and concern for the men we love, but also for fear of the backlash. Society has been ingenious, meanwhile, in finding ways to create more space at the top without forcing men down the ladder. University places expanded as more girls sought access, meaning the competition for boys didn't become too intense. The status of attending cabinet but not actually being in it is a glorified job creation scheme for women, ensuring more female faces at the table without pushing men out. But in organizations with finite budgets, such as the BBC, cutting men's pay could be the only realistic way to close some of the ridiculously large gaps they have been allowed to open up. Why is John Humphrys paid so much more, not only than other Today presenters, but than most of the great and good he interviews? Does Hugh Edwards really need that much money to read the news, even if he can do that thing he does with his eyebrows? Meanwhile, prodding some decent but not exactly indispensable types is the only way to bring new people into the middle ranks of government without expanding the payroll. Mediocre men who could once have expected to progress faster than good women in corporate life will lose out, and they will resent it, close quote. Now, are we clear? This is the mainstream left, my fellow deplorables, not some random, resentful, envious leftist blog. This is how the opposition thinks. Both of these quotes are from January 2018, not some forgotten column of 20 years ago or anything. The point I'm trying to make with these quotes is that militant polarization has already been embraced wholesome by our political opponents. You may have thought I was exaggerating or engaging in hyperbole when I said last month that our political opponents legitimately believe that we don't have a right to exist. But I wasn't. This is, quite literally, what the far left believes. Now, I'm not saying we should also adopt the belief that leftists shouldn't exist, but yes, I am saying that we should do our best to rid ourselves of the compulsion to be nice with such vermin. I am saying that we should embrace the polarization and refuse to treat our political opponents as just people with whom we have some disagreements, because that is no longer true. The pushers on the far left don't just disagree with us on how much the GDP should go to our defense, or whether shortages in state-run healthcare systems are the result of the inherently socialistic nature of the program, or just simple mismanagement, or whether there should be more or less freedom when it comes to education, such as vouchers, private schools, or even homeschooling. No. The pushers on the far left believe all of us should be in jail for the audacity to believe in what we believe. For the most part of the latter half of the 20th century and even the first decade of the 21st century, there was some sort of a consensus, most of the time, between the mainstream left, and by that I mean social democrats, and the mainstream right, whatever that meant. Sometimes I remind people on the Romanian language channel specifically that the overwhelming majority of the things I say, for instance, about borders, used to be classical social democratic policy almost anywhere in Europe as late as 2003 or 2004. Look up, for instance, the policy of the German Social Democratic Party on borders and immigration in the year 2000. It's barely distinguishable from the policy of the Alternative für Deutschland, which is nowadays smeared as far right. For the most part, between the 1950s and late 2000s, we believed about each other that we were wrong on policy, but mostly good people committed to building and maintaining free societies. And for the most part, let's face it, that was indeed true. The problem, though, my fellow deplorables, is that we maintained that belief for far too long beyond the moment it was no longer true. In the current year, most people on the right believe that leftists are mostly good people who are wrong on policy. Most people on the left, on the other hand, believe that right-wingers are evil. So under these conditions, persisting in this pretense game is not just bad strategy, but morally wrong as well. So, what can be done? Well, for starters, as I said, we need a broader change of heart. We need to no longer give a damn about how will the average leftist, the moderates, perceive us. Secondly, we need to get better at moving the middle. We've made some progress in the last year, but we're still far from successfully moving the middle wholesome into our territory. How will we ever know when that has happened? Well, we'll know when it will no longer be acceptable, for instance, to be a communist in public. When it will no longer be acceptable, even at The Guardian, to publish militant misandry and anti-white racism. When outing yourself as a communist will come with repercussions similar, if not harsher, to outing yourself as a Klansman. That is when we've successfully moved the middle. Thirdly, more consistencies on issues where no acceptable compromise is needed. For instance, there should not be a compromise on the safety of children at all, for any reason. That means all guns on the transgender children insanity, as in today. There can't be, nor there should be, a moderate position when it comes to permanently sterilizing children. You're either for the preservation of the physical integrity of children, or you're not. Pick a side and stick with it. No compromise is acceptable. Another example, borders. There cannot be and there should not be any moderate position on borders. You either believe countries should have borders or you don't. You can't be moderate about that. Pick a side and stick with it. Yeah, I know that's extremist. Well, so fucking what? Pregnancy is an extremist fact of life too. You're either pregnant or you're not. You can't be partially pregnant. There is no moderate position on pregnancy. It either exists or it doesn't. Basically what I'm saying is that we need to stop being nice when it comes to the basics. You can't be nice with someone who believes all borders should be abolished. No. Those people are international socialists and belong in a helicopter. Don't give them a platform, don't give them the time of the day, don't engage with them, don't employ them, and very important, make sure you let your fellow man also know if an individual is being an international socialist. Does that sound harsh? Well, maybe. But I am getting sick and tired of this concern trolling that, oh, this kind of action or rhetoric will push the moderates to the left. No, it won't. Recent political events show exactly the opposite. But even if that were the case, I would rather be correct than popular. Moderation in the face of evil is like taking a stick to a gunfight. It just doesn't work like that. Thank God there weren't too many of these moderates when the outing of communists was being discussed. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to get off my chest on this whole moderates thingy. Now I will start caring about moderates when the average moderate will believe in borders, biological reality, controlled immigration, voter ID, and other basic civilizational positions without which there cannot be a civilized, prosperous, and free society. Until then, however, I will have no qualm in equating moderates with essentially appeasers for evil, because most of the time, that's exactly what they are. Cultural wars are not won by the moderates. That is a lesson of history that the left understood a long time ago. We haven't, and it's time we embrace it. And with all of that being said, thank you for watching, thank you for your consistent and generous support. Please do subscribe to my social media, and I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.